Adrian Smith with Adrian Smith Gordon Gill Architects is the winner of the 2011 Council on Tall Buildings Lynn Beedle Lifetime Achievement Award. And he, of course, is the architect behind presently 3 of the 10 tallest buildings in the world. And he's here to talk to us today. Congratulations on the award.
Thank you.
The first question we have that we're asking everyone this year, and we're addressing this to you first, has to do with the next project that you've announced, which is the Kingdom Tower in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which is announced at 1 kilometer high, 1,000 meters. And the question is, what do you think is the single biggest limiting factor that would prevent us from creating a mile-high tower?
Okay, let me correct you on one thing. It's actually going to be over 1 kilometer.
Okay.
So the exact height has not been
disclosed
yet.
Still
yes.
classified.
And I think in terms of building something taller than 1 kilometer, the predominant problem is in the elevator and transportation system. The elevator systems currently can go about 575 meters tall. And so in order to service a 1 mile high tower, for example, you would have to have between 2 and 3 express elevator systems and two or three sky lobby systems where someone going to the top of the building would take an elevator up to 575, over another elevator up to 1150 over, and then potentially get to their floor from there. So you're getting into a situation where you're transferring quite a bit. As you go higher in the building, obviously the value of those units is going to go up, and it's questionable how many people would actually want to go up, transfer and up. The same thing coming down. How often are they going to do that, and will they see that as an inconvenience to the point where they won't want to participate in that?
As an aside here, of course, Frank Lloyd Wright in the Mile High was the first Mile High concept building, and I think over the years they've gone from kind of fantasy concepts to becoming more and more feasible, more and more realistic now. How doable is it now, and what percent is it doable? Is it 100% doable, or we're not quite there yet, are we?
Well, I think we are doable. We've actually been researching 1 mile high tower. We've designed one. You'll see it today in the show. We've worked with Samsung on the construction and engineering on it. So we know we can build it. We know we can engineer it. The key issues are elevatoring and size of the building. Once you get to 1 mile high, you're talking about multiple buildings tied together, most likely, or a very large building with a very large atrium in the middle someplace, because you don't want to have that. You don't want to have a warehouse at the base of the building, and by definition, basically, the buildings will have to be in an aspect ratio of between 8 and 10 to 1. So you're talking about a building that could be 500 to 600 feet in diameter or in breadth at the base. And all you can use of that is sort of like 40 to 50 feet of depth. So you can begin to see the issues that arise.
Can tall buildings ever truly become carbon neutral? And you've done a lot of research on sustainability, of course. That's one of your firm's specialties. Yes.
I think that tall buildings can become carbon neutral, but I think that there's a point of distinction between that. In order to become carbon neutral and incorporate the embodied carbon that it takes to build the building, you actually have to be positive energy in order to burn off the embodied carbon in the building. So that requires that you generate power on the site, and quite a bit of the power on the site. There are ways of doing that. Geothermal is a great way. Solar and wind is pretty good depending on where you're at. Sometimes solar will work, sometimes it won't. Very tall buildings have the disadvantage that they're vertical, so they don't, for the most part, pick up a lot of sun that can be used by photovoltaics in a highly efficient way at the moment. But as research and development of photovoltaics improves, that condition will improve, and it's quite possible in the future you'll see buildings clad in exterior walls that are full of photovoltaic systems. There are a lot of other ways in which to add to that. Fuel cell technology, microprocessor technology, elevator technology could get to a point where it's actually carbon neutral, where it's generating as much power on the way down as it uses on the way up. It's not far from that now. But I think we're still a ways off in terms of the practical application of carbon neutral towers.
You and Gordon and I talked a couple of years ago, and at the time your firm was involved in the retrofit of the Sears Tower. And we were speaking about these same things, about photovoltaics and about wind turbine energy and the various systems that could be brought to bear in a building of that size. Has the technology changed that much in the last 2 years?
Technology has not changed that much. The same technology is available now that was then. It's becoming a little more efficient, and it's possible that Sears or other very large buildings will eventually be reclad in systems that will generate power for that building. And one of the systems that are available now in PVs are thin film technologies, which actually don't rely on direct sunlight. So even on the north face of the building, you'll generate some power from the ambient light.
So we do have more of these buildings going up than we did a couple of years ago. What have we learned, if anything, about the application of these technologies?
We've learned that they are problematic from a cost point of view. A lot of clients are still leery of introducing high quantities of PV systems, especially on towers, because it's not something that will pay for itself anytime soon. Now, there are exceptions to that. We're doing a project in Korea called the Federation of Korean Industries Tower. That is a 50-story tower, and on the exposed surfaces, meaning the west and the south surfaces of that building, about 50% of the spandrel areas are clad with PV. And they will pay for themselves, but primarily because there is a program in place in Korea that allows a 7-to-1 buyback. So for every kilowatt that you produce on the building, they will pay you 7 times what it would cost to take that power off the grid. So it's a sort of an artificial way of encouraging clients to use PV systems.
2011, of course, is the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and a lot has transpired in the last 10 years in the tall building world, and you certainly have been right in the middle of it. And of course, you were in on that fateful conversation that morning when Donald Trump was in the office, and all of you were talking about the height of the new Trump Tower in Chicago. As far as buildings being safer from terrorism now, how are things different now than they were 10 years ago?
Well, I think that the buildings now that are being designed are definitely safer than they were pre-9/11. Many of the systems structurally there are built-in redundancies in these tall buildings, super tall buildings. There's also materials that have progressed in terms of the quality of their hardness and strength, especially concrete. And there's a robustness about most of the engineering systems that are going into the super tall buildings now that were not so prevalent pre-9/11, primarily because the buildings now are so much bigger. You know, a 600-meter building today is almost common in the super tall business, whereas 1993 when we did Jinmao, that was China's tallest building at 421 meters. So that extra 200 meters makes a lot of difference in terms of the robustness of a building.
So was 9/11 a catalyst for this, or was it pretty inevitable that this was going to happen anyway?
I think it was a catalyst for looking at the codes and looking at the safety elements as it relates to exiting buildings. Today, stairways are required to be a little wider. Firefighting elevators are required to be connected to at least one of the stairways. There are other detail aspects of it that help to control what happens if liquid or fuel is in the building burning, and how it can stay away from shaft areas. Some people are exploring the use of elevators as an evacuation means. Stairway systems now routinely have areas of refuge associated with them on a 10 to 15 story basis. So a lot of things have been incorporated now that were not even on the scene pre-9/11.
We would like to ask you what you think the best tall building is in existence today, he of the world's tallest building. And Anthony has asked us, we know this is a difficult question, but pick a building other than your own. When you look at other tall buildings today, what gets your attention? What is the best one out there?
I still enjoy the Hancock Building in Chicago. I think it's an elegant, powerful structure that really is expressive of the sort of big shoulders approach and attitude of the city of Chicago. It's a work ethic building. It's a powerful piece, and it expresses the nature of Chicago beautifully.
It's kind of hard to talk to you about your career because you've done so many things, and I guess creative people tend to frame their careers in terms of the projects they've done, their portfolio. Is that the way you look back on yours, or are there other things that we're perhaps missing here?
Well, when I think about my career, I think about all of the things that I didn't know, that it took me 45 years to learn, and all the things that I still don't know that I'm excited about learning in the future. When I first started at SOM, one of the first buildings I worked on was the John Hancock Building. And it was at the base of the building. I learned how to do shop drawings on that building from a man named Guermon Scott. And the excitement about working on Chicago's tall structure, and a structure so unique and powerful as that building, really gets into your blood. And you hope someday that you will be able to work on buildings that are as significant as that or as tall as that. And so that was always in the background of my time coming up as an architect. When I became a partner in 1980, the first project I worked on as a partner was a small bank building in Guatemala. And shortly before then, I worked with a man named Ricardo Legarreta, who was an architect in Mexico. And he had worked with Luis Barragan as well. And these two had espoused a philosophy about relating the buildings to the culture and the character of the places in which they're in. And I first basically learned about that idea from them. And that really struck me as well. And so my first works were based in a philosophical approach of what I call contextualism, which takes into consideration, at least at that time, the culture, the climate, the site, the orientation, the nature of materials, but also the character of the vernacular architecture in those areas. What were buildings like before air conditioning? What were they like in terms of the common construction methods at the time? And I drew from those things within the city or region that I thought were important and appropriate to maintain in those areas with new buildings that we're doing. And so that contextual approach has stayed with me has shifted and changed and evolved over time, but that has been my guiding tenet. As I went through Banco de Occidente and United Gulf Bank in Bahrain and Rose Wharf in Boston and AT&T in Chicago and a couple buildings in London, I started to see that I was not introducing an important, well, I wasn't paying enough attention to a very important criteria, which is time, the time that we are now building in, the bringing in the newest technologies and the newest thought processes. So my contextualism started to evolve by looking for and discovering new methodologies of how to build a building and to incorporate that into the design process. And you can see that best in projects like 10 Ludgate in London, built over railroad tracks, and 201 Broadgate, the 36-story tower at Bishopsgate, Broadgate Complex, and the Jinmao Tower, where there was an evolution there. The Jinmao Tower in particular, you know that's a Chinese building. You know that feels like China. You know it's part of that culture. But when you visit it and you see it and you're around it, you also know that that was built in a particular time in the present, not in the distant past, which I couldn't actually say that about buildings like Rose Wharf. So that was an important transition point for me. And then as we go into the future and the near present, as we started our new firm, Adrian Smith plus Gordon Gill Architecture, we started thinking about a global contextual approach and thinking more about the site in terms of the amenities that that site can bring to the tower, instead of just focusing on how much energy can we save by designing the building for energy reduction and protecting against solar issues. Can we mine, can we harvest the power of the wind, the power of the sun, the geothermal assets around the site, and incorporate that into our contextual approach. Much like the vernacular architecture, which was done 100 years ago, or pre-air conditioning for sure, where they had to design to be protective of the environment and protecting the interior space from the environment quite often. So our work over the last 6 years has been focusing on still contextualism, but contextualism that extends that idea into still newer generations of activity.
Something happened to one of your designs that I don't think I've seen happen anywhere else to another building design, and that is the Burj Khalifa. They want to build one in China, just like the one in Dubai, which brings to mind all sorts of interesting possibilities. What did you think when you heard that?
I heard that China was looking to build a building similar in height to Burj, but I didn't hear that it was an identical building.
Okay, it sounded like they wanted to build a replica right in China.
And I when I heard that, I contacted Mohammed Alabar from Emaar to ask him if he knew anything about it and if the rumors were true, and he says no, they're not true, and I haven't heard anything about it. So
it's kind of disappointing. That would be kind of surreal, and I'll tell you, I have tall building dreams of Jinmao showing up in Chicago, and it actually fits in very nicely, but that brings an interesting question to mind. You know, you produce a global icon or a city icon like the John Hancock Center, and someone decides they want to build one in another city. Are your designs obviously owned by someone, and someone can't just build another building like that unless you're in on it, I would expect?
Right.
Okay.
Well, that's typically true, and I think that anybody who wants to replicate the building, there are always other issues that are involved. The site is usually different, the wind forces are different, Solar conditions are different. For example, in Chicago to Dubai, there's quite a difference in the way in which you'd have to do your mechanical systems. There's usually enough difference that you can make a sibling and have a relationship, but still more contextualized for the place.
All of a sudden now you have your own firm, so the student has become the master. And not only do you have your own firm, but now you're designing buildings that are a mile high and taller, and so you're probably about the only people on the planet who are doing that right now, by and large. I'm thinking that that's probably a very small group of firms that are designing buildings of that height right now. Is the demand out there?
Many of the projects, I mean, not many of the projects, the really super tall buildings like the mile-high structure, those are research efforts for us. We do them because we want to find out what the problems are. And once you have a problem, then you can begin to solve it. So we're in the exploratory stage now for doing that. We're also researching. We feel research is a very important component to how we want to practice. And so virtually everything we do is research, but some of it's research not for a client, some of it is research to investigate an issue. For example, one of the commonly asked questions is, are super tall buildings sustainable? And so when you ask that question, you have to sort of ask, compared to what? You know, are they sustainable compared to a group of 40-story buildings, or are they sustainable compared to 100 acres of single-family homes, which would, you know, so we're in the process of doing studies like that. And we're not out to say, we don't have a predetermined outcome to that study. We're interested in finding out what are the facts and how do you best use those facts in the future.
So you have two tall buildings now. You have the Burj Khalifa, 828 meters. You've announced the Kingdom Tower at 1,000 plus. What is going on in these countries socially? How do we explain the presence of these tall buildings? And I think I know part of the answer to this because in one interview you said that these buildings are kind of a catalyst, that they draw development around them. So I'm wondering what's going on socially in places like Saudi Arabia that they can seriously look at a kilometer tall building.
In Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom Tower is envisioned to be the centerpiece to a much larger development of 200-300 acres and 20 million square feet of buildings in an area north of Riyadh, which is the direction Riyadh wants the city to go in. So if you compare it to, say, a Canary Wharf or to a downtown Burj condition, it makes sense to do that. Now, the Kingdom Tower at 1 kilometer plus is a catalyst for that development. And it's the catalyst for selling land around the tower, too. And it may be the catalyst for actually the developers and the investors to make money on the whole project. To make money on a single super tall building is difficult. It's very difficult in Chicago, as seen by the Spire. I think Burj Khalifa probably broke even or made a little bit of money because they hit the market right. It's yet to be determined whether Kingdom Tower will make money or not. The prices of construction are good right now. We're in a recession or near a recession, so they're able to buy materials at rock bottom prices. Labor is inexpensive in Saudi Arabia, so the actual cost of the building is not a tremendous burden, but the game plan is to make the money on all the surrounding context. If you don't do that, it's a real difficult issue to justify construction of a super tall by itself.
Well, I want to thank you for coming by, and I think it's a real testament to your work that as we sit here and talk about your career, we are very much looking towards the future because there are so many new things that you're working on that are fascinating and so much more good work to be done. And thank you for coming by.
Well, thank you.